Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's another stellar edition of .NET Rocks, the internet audio talk show for .NET developers. And I'm your host in New London, Connecticut, Carl Franklin. And just back from a whirlwind tour of the United States, Mark Dunn in Atlanta, Georgia. How are you tonight, Mark?
Hoo-ha, Carl. I am doing fabulous. Glad to be here. Glad to be home. And whirlwind tour is right. I got back from Microsoft a couple of weeks ago, and I'm taking this week off.
Very cool. How many weeks in a row have you been teaching now?
I had taught 10 classes in a row.
Jeez. So now you're sort of...
Yeah, I need a break. Got to catch my second wind. So I'm about to engage a contract with a friend down in Birmingham to help him out with some architecture on a product that he's writing.
Cool.
So that's going to be kind of a nice departure from doing training all the time.
Yeah, you've really recently gotten into architecture consulting. That sort of seems to be your area of focus lately.
Yeah, that's right. I've been doing some mentoring for some local companies, and that's worked out very well.
That's great. Well, folks, call Mark if you need help with your architecture. So, what a great show that was with Bill again last week, huh?
Oh, Bill is always a hoot.
He's a riot. Smart guy,
He's
too.
Wild Bill Vaughn.
Yeah, I remember seeing him way back in the early days. I guess, when RDO came out, he was just ecstatic over, DAO. And he's always sort of hated Jet. So it was funny to see him up there on the stage just bashing stuff left and right and everybody cheering.
Oh, yeah, he was probably driving a horse and buggy back then. RDO goes back a while.
That's right, yeah. It's true. But it certainly was a departure. When people finally realized that they couldn't load 10,000 megabytes of data in a single query, give it all to the user, and let them sort through it anymore. It just doesn't work.
That's not a good idea anyway.
Yeah.
We want small chunks of data, not big chunks.
So, just as an aside here, we're taping on. We usually tape on Wednesday nights, but we're taping on a Tuesday night this week. We have speaking at the Boston .NET Users Group tomorrow night, and so I can't make it. But on Tuesday nights, right across the street here is an AA meeting, and it started out very small, just a few people going to it every once in a while. And what they do is, before the meeting, they stand outside on the street, right in the driveway of my building here, and they sort of congregate and smoke cigarettes and talk and stuff.
You run into any Java developers?
And well, anyway, they so they've been growing in numbers. And when I came in tonight, to record, they were cranking boom boxes, just having like a carnival in the street out there, clanking on tambourines and smoking butts and slapping high fives, and just it took me like 5 minutes just to get through the driveway. I just had to make swimming motions with my hands to get them out of the way so I could get in the driveway. So, but they seem to have all cleared out now, so I don't think we'll have any unexpected noise. But I was afraid there for a minute. We're gonna have some car horns and other things in the background.
Got a wild AA meeting out in the parking lot.
Yep. Well, anyway, our guest tonight is one of the regional directors. There are two of them for the New York metropolitan area, and as you know, the Microsoft regional directors are a loosely knit extranet of experts all around the world that represent their local development communities to Microsoft, and vice versa. And Stephen Forte is with us from New York City. Andrew Brust is his counterpart over there. They cover together a large area, including New Jersey and southwestern Connecticut. Stephen, how you doing?
I'm doing great. It's great to be here. How you guys doing?
We're doing fine. I forgot to mention that you're the CTO and the co-founder of Corazon, which is in and of itself a .NET success story, and as well as being the regional director. I guess that's what you do for real, right?
That's my day job. Yeah.
How did you arrive at the name Corazon?
Well, the name Corazon is actually pretty interesting because it was a domain name that was open, that was short, and 2 syllables.
Hey, you can't beat that.
Can't beat that.
I was thinking it was a planet in one of the Star Wars movies, but that was Coruscant.
Coruscant.
It very well could be. We just discovered that a Belgian beer is called Korzendorf, and we were very excited about that and bought a case of it to celebrate some of our recent customer acquisitions. So,
hey, well, you can't go wrong with that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you got any left?
Actually, I think there's about 2 or 3 bottles left down in the office. So
I'll save me one so I come down
next
there.
time you're in New York, you can definitely have one.
What's your relationship with the users group down there?
Okay, there is a user group that's about a year old, the New York City .NET Developers Group, and I am the co-founder and the co-moderator. Andrew, myself, and another individual named Bill Zach, who's very involved with the community, formed this user group, and it's a great user group. We get over 100 folks. We meet at the local Microsoft office, and we have excellent speakers. Chris Kinsman is speaking next week on the 20th.
He's great.
Yeah, and I think, Carl, you're speaking in July or August.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I basically, my role in the user group, besides being one of the moderators, is to help acquire the speakers, and I run the list server. We have probably about 500 or so names on our list server that we, blast out to. If for some strange reason people as far away as Australia join our list server, and I'm not sure why.
Well, so are you guys an INETA group?
Yes, we are. We've been involved with INETA pretty much since the beginning of INETA, and INETA's been a great organization. They've supplied us with speakers. I believe Chris is coming as an INETA speaker in a week from tomorrow, a week from Thursday.
So for those who don't know what INETA is, that's what is the International .NET Users Group Association of some kind?
Yeah, and
what does it stand for?
Yeah, I believe INETA has a bunch of sponsors, Microsoft being one of them, but not the only. So it's not a Microsoft organization at all.
Right.
And what they basically will do is they provide support. It's mostly, almost exclusively volunteer-based, which I was very surprised.
Yeah.
I started crawling my way through the bureaucracy of INETA, and I don't use bureaucracy as a bad word. It's actually very easy to get through the information there. And most of the folks are volunteers. I just volunteered and spoke at the Vermont .NET Users Group, and Julie Lehman, the president of that group, is a big time person in INETA. So I got to know her well through INETA. So they're a great organization. It's they provide pizza when you have a speaker from INETA, and they'll even pay for they're flying in Ken Getz all the way from Los Angeles.
That's right.
They're paying his airfare and hotel to come speak at our New York Users Group. So
yeah, they're setting up a tour for Don Box, I think, aren't they?
I believe you're right. I'm not 100% sure of the details.
Yeah, so check your local user group. If you're listening to this show and you're not at a .NET user group and you're using .NET, something wrong with you, son.
Yeah, there definitely is no excuse not to be a member of a user group.
And you get free pizza, and you occasionally win a raffle, and you might get some games or an Xbox or something. So that's definitely a good thing.
It's all about the community experience, though. I believe.
Right.
I started a user group, way back in my early days of a VB and Access programmer about 8 or 9 years ago. I started a New York City Access and VB user group, and I've met folks that have been, I've hired folks out of the group. I've gotten work out of the group. I've made just good personal relationships, good friends from the user group. I mean, friends, guys who have, been to my wedding and everything. I mean, great folks at these user groups. One of my really close friends I met at the user group. So it's a social.
It's difficult to find, I think, peers in this group if you're not geographically close to other programmers, just because there really aren't a lot of people that understand what we do and that we can have a conversation with that means anything,
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, even in a city as large as New York, there is a community here. I mean, I'm not going to try to fool you guys, but a city as large as New York, it's big, it's impersonal, and there's so many people doing so many different things. There's so many other industries in New York. Even though the programming population here is huge, I mean, it's probably one of the largest in the world, it's still hard to find that community aspect. And one of the only places I get it, besides at my office, is at the user group.
How large is the user group?
We have about 400 members and 450 last time I checked, but that translates to about 100 and 125 consistently at a meeting. So we really have about 100 repeat customers, so to speak, every month, and then we, give or take another 25 with walk-ins and telling a friend and that type of stuff.
Cool.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
So we want to talk about your .NET success stories here, and one of the most widely read publications in New York City is the Zagat catalog of restaurants, and you had something to do with their website, did you not?
Yes, I did. about 3 years ago, in late 1999, I was hired at Zagat Survey. It's not, you guys all out there in Radioland might know it as Zagats or Zagat or Zagat. It's actually, it was founded by a couple, and their name is Tim and Nina Zagat. And having worked for them for 2.5 years, I learned how to pronounce their name properly. So
okay.
It is Zagat, rhymes with cat, Z-A-G-A-T, and it's actually interesting. It's a offline and online venture. It's been around for about 25 years, so obviously it was offline first. And the book, their little red restaurant book called the Zagat Restaurant Guide, sells more books in New York City than any other book, even more than the Bible, which is a little scary when you think about it. But
you got to eat. I mean,
I guess you have to eat. You don't have to go to church, but you do have to eat.
I first saw that catalog when I was doing some consulting for a studio in New York City a few years back, and there was a great, what was it? It was a Spanish and Chinese restaurant, which is an unbelievable combination.
And very interesting.
And they delivered, of course, till 3 a.m, which is amazing. You can just to call someone at 3 a.m. and say, "Send over an order of Peruvian chicken," you know. 20 minutes later, ding dong, is a guy at your front door.
That's great.
Yeah, just a great town. Anyway, that was the first time I saw them. The second time I heard of them was on Chris Farley on Saturday Night Live, did a thing with Adam Sandler, where Chris Farley was in drag playing this, housewife, and Adam Sandler was the drunk husband, and she was reading from the Zagat's catalog.
That's wild.
And here's a good one. And he would read the description and then go, and Adam Sandler would say stuff like, "Shoot me now! I'm in the middle of a moron sandwich." Anyway.
Yeah. It was really fun working there because the public relations department would always find those and circulate them around the office. So, I mean, it wasn't a huge company, about 100 people. And, so we all knew each other well. And so when somebody discovered one, they would forward it to the whole company, to everybody. And there was a website that parodied, like Life, and, Zagat has the ratings, and they would, say, never should have gotten out of the womb would be maybe the little write-up, and lots of funny things. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
That's cool. So what did their website entail? I guess it was the website you were doing for them?
Well, I was actually the chief technology officer, so it's funny when you say CTO, a lot of people don't know what that means. So I would say, well, I'm responsible for everything that plugs into the wall. And so we did a lot of interesting things. I mean, from a Great Plains implementation to building a WinForms application as a .NET early adopter to building an ASP Classic website, which, at its height would get, the .com era got millions of hits a day. And what I find real interesting is the work that we did. We built a content management system that's they're finally seeing the fruits of that labor today. And it really started as a .NET project about a year before .NET shipped, and great success with it. I mean, we learned a lot about .NET along the way.
You were a true early adopter then.
We absolutely were. And at some points, I mean, we made some mistakes. We basically wrote a whole data access layer that was probably a good, I'm going to guess, maybe one full developer month, that if we would have noted that, the dataset.isNested equals true, we didn't need.
Oh, man.
So we've made we definitely lost some time and made some mistakes, but even losing a little bit of time, which was our fault, we gained a phenomenal advantage over by using .NET. And part of it was the product that we were building was so big, so complex, it needed design patterns, it really needed an object-oriented approach. Yep. And I had a whole bunch of VB and ASP and Access developers on staff. So I could have went out and taught them all. I could have fired them all and got Java programmers. I could have fired them all and gotten C++ programmers, or I could have trained them all in C++. Or I could have been a .NET early adopter and used, C# or VB.NET, which we did. That project was all in VB.NET. So
wow.
They were able to come up to speed with the design patterns and everything fairly quickly and get this project out the door. I mean, like any project.
Sorry, this was a Windows Forms project?
This is a Windows Forms project, yeah.
What was the nature of it? What did it do?
It basically collected data. So if for those of you out there are familiar with the Zagat surveys, it's basically, I would say a content management system, but a surveying management system. We'd get data elements to create a survey, pump out a survey that went to our website. When the survey results come in, tabulate the scores, and then let the editors edit the reviews and scores, and then distribute the information with output.
Wow.
I would send it out as XML. in our output, and we had various formats of our output. One would be a book. We integrated with FrameMaker. I forget who makes it. I think Adobe makes it.
Yeah, I think so.
With Adobe FrameMaker. So we integrated with our VB.NET with Adobe FrameMaker. It also, glorified DTS out to the web. So, the web was one of the formats. And they're doing lots of interesting, I've been out of there over a year, but I'm very proud of them. They're doing wonderful, interesting things with it now. They're, wireless and Pocket PC platforms, and they're doing different types of books. So it enabled the company to expand out of the restaurant world. And I'm holding in my hand right now a shopping guide, a Zagat shopping guide. They have nightlife books and hotel books and shopping books, that use the same kind of MO as the restaurant books. So they're, piggybacking off that restaurant success, and the technology is really making it happen. So
when you mentioned DTS, I heard Mark's eyebrows go up.
Right. Yeah, DTS is cool. So what were you doing with DTS?
Oh, we had a structure where we had a, highly transactional, super codified database. And that particular database was our production database, which produced the book and stored all this content. And our content management system was then hierarchical in nature because it was element and attribute based. And we had a website, and we can kind of talk a little bit about the Zagat.com website, because I'm a big fan of letting Dr. Cod not come to the web. Dr. Cod, Dr. Cod had his time, and that's for your nice client-server OLTP applications. But on the web, if you have content that is relatively static, you basically need to publish lots of repeating information and minimize joins and minimize lookups and et cetera, et cetera. So
data set
denormalize.
Cache.
Exactly. And that is what we did. And I pushed that through. My developers resisted me. And I took that model and brought it to Corzin. And my developers didn't resist me because, well, they saw the success of Zagat, obviously. Zagat.com, which was built in ASP Classic, it took about, it's a huge website. It took about 7 people, I'd say about 4 developers and 2 testers and a manager. It took about 5 months to build. And when it was done, we gained about, 1,000% performance increase over a previous site, which used Java and, basically about 13 Java objects and then an ASP layer on top of that.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of fun building it. But I think what's interesting is what we did with our DTS packages, we pushed millions and millions of repeated information to the website. So every page you would go to on that website pretty much had a table. So every type of query you could run had its own table. And that worked real well because users didn't update that information. The information that the users updated was in a separate database.
Right.
And that was transactional, and Dr. Cod was allowed in that particular database. He just wasn't allowed on our content published database. So I took that forward with Corzin. And Corzin is actually done all with .NET. And a lot of the lessons that I learned at Zagat after from my years there, I took there. And what's interesting is we did that, obviously, this was, we built it, started last April. And it took 3 people, which was basically 1 developer, 1 manager/developer, 1 tester, and the tester was part-time, and it took us 2 months to build. And it's a site almost as large as Zagat. I would say just about as large as Zagat.
Jeez, that's incredible.
When it comes to database side, it's as many database queries and stored procedures and objects. It's maybe about 5% less pages, but...
Yeah, what a testament to .NET.
I think you're absolutely correct, and this is why I've been such a fan of .NET. And I say, people go, "Oh, you're a Microsoft guy," and I've actually have not been a Microsoft guy my whole programming experience. I started off coding in Java when I got into Wall Street and did other things. So I've experienced the other side, and I really have to say, at Zagat we had a very cheap website. I'd say saved over $1 million than going the Oracle Java route, and had a tremendous performance increase. And then going from ASP Classic to ASP.NET, from Zagat to, Corzin, it only took us about 2 months with half the amount of people. So it really is a testament. And, I think of the things that are kind of like really saved us the time. And I think the number one thing was we're using a compiled language, right? We're using a true, VB.NET or C#. We're using a true language at Corzin. We're not using a scripting language. And that's not really kind of spoken about that much in the Microsoft circles, in the marketing literature, and even in the testimonials. That's not really spoken about that much by developers. But I think that was the number one performance gain. And then obviously the other great things that we did was we we use things like fragmented caching and making our own user controls. I mean, you couldn't make a user control in ASP Classic. You can do server-side includes.
Includes, right.
We had at one point, we had like 4 layers of includes on one page. And I'm like, this has got to stop. And it was a very well-architected site. My architects did a fabulous job. But, I mean, that was the technology at the time.
Right.
And 4 layers of includes just gave, I took pause at that. And, now we have these, comparing it now 2 years later at Corzine, we have, user controls all over the place, reusing code, using an interface to do a download procedure where in the past, if it wasn't object-oriented and it wasn't .NET, you'd have like one big ugly object. And every time we added a page to the site, we'd have to add a property and a method to this object. Now we use an interface, and each web page implements that interface. So there's, one of my developers came up with that. It was fabulous.
So let me just get this right. So your Zagat site, how long did that take to build? And that was
5 months of development effort, and it was 7 people. It was 4 developers and a manager and a tester.
And you built the same scale of a site for Corzine with really 1 developer.
Pretty much 1 to 1.5 developers, yeah.
1 to 1.5 in a month.
In 2 months.
2 months.
Mm-hmm. And that's not.
So what are people doing here with Java and jerking around with all this other stuff? Why don't the results speak for themselves? Don't people want to save time and money?
Yeah, and I look at the things about that, what we got from .NET. I mean, a simple concept like forms authentication, that takes a week off your development cycle.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Of any project
so
you're
doing. So you don't
doing.
have to plug holes in your security model constantly.
Exactly, because it is just built in. View state. Okay, right? We'll talk about some of the server controls that we use, but,
Why don't we explain a little bit about what those things are to the listener who doesn't know?
Sure thing. Forms authentication is a built-in security mechanism that allows a ASP.NET developer to just choose the type of security they want declaratively in a configuration file, and it pretty much just works. So you can choose your challenge response type security, you can use Windows security, or you can use what's called forms authentication, which basically is you tell a configuration file, go to this form when a user needs to log in. And you can set your whole site to be password protected or only portions of your site at a directory level. So we have 2 or 3 directories that are protected, and the rest of the site is free. So you can go to Corzine.com and browse around and see the top-level stuff. But when you get into the hardcore stuff, which was built with .NET, it's all in a protected directory.
So the idea is you don't have to check with an include at the top of every page, is this person logged in?
Exactly.
If not, reroute them to the login page.
There's a benefit here.
Because if you forget,
not only
you've got a security hole.
But developers now don't have to worry about security, which is great because developers don't always think about security.
Yeah,
and that's how security holes get built in.
Yep.
But another piece of this equation is a developer. If we want to make a page, our site is a subscription model where we basically gather data from a variety of places and we aggregate it, we data warehouse it, and then we distribute it with our .NET app. And what will happen is if we want to put a particular page, we want to make it a free page, I just remove it from a directory that's protected and change the URL that links to it.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I want to make a certain group of pages free for, let's say, 30 days, I can just change my config file for that particular directory.
Right.
So it's declarative security, and it works, and it works well.
Yeah, that it does. Listen, if you guys want to hang on a second, we'll take a few minutes and pay the bills. Hey, are you an out-of-work VB developer looking to sharpen your skills any way you can? Trying to pinch as many pennies as possible? Maybe you considered our VBNet Masterclass but passed it up because it was too pricey. Well, we're going to offer you a .NET Rocks April Bad Economy Special. For our April class, that's April 7th through the 11th, we're offering unemployed VB developers a seat in our class for half price. That's right, $1,000. That includes 5 great lunches. All you got to do is get here to New London, Connecticut. Interested? Can you prove to us that you're unemployed? All right, well then call Todd Follansby in our sales office, toll free at 877-273-46 4838 if you're interested in attending the Franklin'sNet VBNet Masterclass April 7th through 11th in New London, Connecticut for half price. Only for the unemployed, however. Keep your chin up. And hey, by the way, just for a laugh, check out a great website that I love, www.oddtodd.com, oddtodd.com. Doesn't have anything to do with our Todd, but if you're unemployed, you're going to definitely like the little flash movies they have up there. All right, well, now let's get back to .NET Rocks with Stephen Forte, talking about design patterns and ASP.NET and all sorts of fun things right here on .NET Rocks. Don't you go away.
The other thing you talked about was view state, and this is a blessing and a curse. I don't know if you will agree with me.
I will.
Yeah. View state is for the techie people out there, it's a hidden input tag that gets automatically put in forms that get generated by ASP.NET controls. You don't have to write your own HTML forms to post back to the server. All that is done for you automatically. And this hidden tag contains I think it's a base 64 encoded serialization of all the non-standard properties of the server-side controls that generate the HTML. So it maintains the state of those controls through every round trip. So if you've got a calendar control and you have, a list box control, and you select an item in the list box and then you go round trip, then when it comes back, you want that item to be selected again. You don't want to have to maintain that yourself. And likewise, if you select a date on the calendar control, you want that to be maintained as the selected date. And you also want the list box to stay in its own state. So basically, it's for managing the state of the controls round trip. The problem with it is that the concept of the back button doesn't bode well with the view state.
Not at all.
And if you hit the back button to go back a page, which was just, one refresh ago, your view state may have completely changed, and you may have lost some data, or you may have gained some data you didn't want, or otherwise changed. The other problem, of course, is that it holds all the non-standard properties, which includes data in a list box and in a data grid and everything else. And if you've got lots of grids and lots of data, that can add up to, 20, 25, 30K or more.
Sometimes a lot more than that.
Sometimes a lot more than that. That's right. And it'll compound on itself and just get out of control. Now, you can turn it off. You don't have to use view state for everything. Some things you don't want to use it for, but that means you just have to handle that state yourself.
Well, view state is really great when you are not having to write code to remember what the user selected in a list box.
Yeah.
That's what it was intended for, and you just don't have to think about it. And that's another reason why we saved so many months in developer hours on this project, because we didn't have to write any of that code. And
right.
ASP would have to loop through the select of a drop-down and all of that. Where we found view state not working for us was in our data grids. We used the server controls.
Right.
Which would, the data grid server control basically will spit out HTML in a table based upon tabular data from a data set or a data reader. And by default, if you're just displaying a data grid onto a web page, and let's say it has 100 rows, and you're not doing anything with it, you have no need for the view state.
Right.
Because you're just going to go refresh that from the database next time the user runs that query. If you're doing paging and sorting, a lot of developers like to use, and this is where it gets very controversial, which is faster. A lot of developers will say, well, I'd rather load the information in the view state, sort it in memory, and then redisplay it, as opposed to doing another select statement out of my SQL server. And I am a big fan of making another round trip to the SQL server.
Or if I was going to cache it, I'd cache the data set that it binds to it.
Exactly. You cache the data set. And at Corza, we have a couple data sets that are just cached in our cache engine because we use a third-party charting control by Dundas. And we have a lot of charts that the users can interact with and change dates, and it's a great tool. And maybe we can talk about it later. But what happens is a bunch of the charts have a lot of defaults. And the data on some of the charts don't change every day. They change every Monday. So we actually we have a routine that we run that will take our data set and keep it in memory for a week.
Yep.
And so all the defaults do not make another round trip to the database. So
you're sort of doing what the cache object does.
We're
a little
using
bit.
the caching API of ASP.NET, absolutely,
Okay.
and we're basing and making our cache dependent on a file.
Right.
And we change that, and when that file changes, it will rebind and redo the data set.
Oh, so you are using the cache. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah, the cache is a great thing.
It really is, and I'm a big fan of caching, and fragmented caching is the coolest byproduct of having a user control. You can cache sections of your page and not the entire page.
Yeah, fragmented caching is awesome, and I run into a lot of ASP developers that are not even aware that that's an option. I don't know if you consider that something advanced in ASP.NET, but they just haven't picked up on it yet.
I think it's at some point folks will not really know what a user control is, and once they get the user control and you say, hey, you can cache the user control but not the whole page, it's just like the light bulb goes off. At conferences when I show this off, I see the light bulbs going off. So I don't think it's really advanced. I just think it's not as intuitive as it may be. It's not as obvious to folks.
People need an example.
I'm running into developers that are aware that they can build user controls. They just are not aware of, using the attribute on it to set it for the output cache.
Yeah, and I find that this is one of the areas where .NET excels so much over the Java platform that I've become like a little mini evangelist of the caching API, and particularly the fragmented caching, because you can get some performance gains that are just absolutely ridiculous.
Oh, yeah. Well, consider you're getting over 1 million hits a day?
Mm-hmm.
So if you just cache for 5 seconds,
Do the math.
Do the math. That's about 7,000 requests that don't have to execute. They can come right out of memory.
For example, I was using a repeater control, and what we did is we used a repeater control for a navigation bar in our application. And what we did is this navigation was dynamically driven from the database. So by using fragmented caching, the data would only change a couple times a day. So by using the fragmented caching, what will happen is we saved hundreds and hundreds of round trips and re-renderings by using the cache object. So
per second, or?
I would say hundreds probably per minute, but at the height of the day, we have a lot of business users. From 9 to 5 is when we peak. I would say sometimes it could be hundreds per second.
Wow.
So, the math definitely adds up. I'd rather that come from RAM on the web server and the cache engine than have to re-render with the ASP.NET engine, re-hit the SQL server.
Probably the simplest way that you can scale a .NET application, an ASP.NET application.
I've gone around the world literally doing conference sessions and user groups and everything else, and what I tell developers is price, performance, and lines of code. This is the number one thing you can do in an application to increase your performance and scalability.
That's what I tell them too.
Well, hey, Stephen, you mentioned design patterns earlier when you were talking about the Zagat project that you worked on. How drastic have the design patterns changed from going to a Windows DNA application or from one to a .NET app?
Surprisingly, in the previous projects I've worked on before, we've done some pretty large projects before I was at Zagat when I was consulting. Surprisingly, the patterns, some of the core patterns used, like the factory pattern and the singleton pattern, have not really changed all that much. It's amazing. The architecture is architecture, meaning .NET or DNA or even J2EE for that matter. The underlying architecture is your architecture, but those design patterns really have stood the test of time. Have you found that yourself?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I wanted to ask you the same question. If you're creating a facade layer of some sort for your data.
Exactly what we were doing, and get the loose coupling with some of the other patterns. And
what do you mean by what exactly did you do for a facade layer? This is one of my peeves, is that people think that they should be taking data out of a data set or a data reader and going into a specific dummy set of dumb classes that just represent the fields of the data instead of just using the data set.
I'm really glad you bring that up, because that's one of my peeves too. And what's interesting about that is I am not a fan of these generic classes, and then you get a collection class of that class. I walked into a project as a consultant, and it was a disaster because they had a collection class to fill a bunch of objects of customers. So they had customer and customers collection class to fill a list box.
Right.
I mean, it took a day of coding effort where they basically could have solved the problem by passing back, at that point it was RDO.
Right, just to be object-oriented.
Exactly. Sometimes they take the object-oriented pill and take it a little too seriously.
Yeah.
And what usually happens with design patterns is people read the Gang of Four's book. I mean, I'm looking at it right now on my shelf. It's, a classic.
Right.
And they read the book, and they do everything all wrong for about a year.
Right.
And then they come back and realize it. And I was guilty of it.
I was going to say, I did that too, I fell into the trap myself.
I fell into the trap, but slightly different. My trap is an interesting one to chat about, as I thought I was a genius at the time, and I really was just being stupid, is I said, I'll make my object so generic that I can change data access methodologies midway through the project,
right.
and I will just spit back. This is when XML was brand new. I drank the Kool-Aid. I'll just spit back XML. Well, besides the fact that XSLT was just slow and
I don't know if anybody,
I
don't know if the listener heard that little comment you just made. That was brilliant. I drank the Kool-Aid.
I drank the Kool-Aid. You got it.
XML is good.
XML is good. Drink the Kool-Aid. I drank the
Some
XML.
of our younger listeners won't understand that reference, but that's okay.
Just look up Jonestown in the encyclopedia.
Yeah, that's it.
And I was once speaking at a conference in the Netherlands, and I had to explain all of Jonestown to them because I made the Kool-Aid remark, and someone asked me what it meant.
Oh, no.
And I had to go through the whole story, and it was a good 10 minutes.
That was a world event, though. That wasn't just an American thing. That happened in Guyana.
It happened in Guyana, but they were young and didn't really, the story was pertinent more in the United States than anywhere else.
Well, he was American.
Yeah, because they were our psychos.
Yeah.
But I drank back to our
I'm sorry
Kool-Aid. I drank the Kool-Aid, and with my design patterns, I designed my applications probably about 1998. When I really started getting on the design pattern bandwagon, I started spitting back XML. And I started with arrays in the early days.
Yeah.
And I realized I never changed my data access methodology. I changed it when I go from DAO to RDO to ADO to .NET, but that's years in between. So I basically, applications I've been designing now is I will have my class basically be a data set factory or data reader factory, and that encapsulate my data in a data set. In essence, Microsoft gave us that object. It's called the data set.
That's what it's for.
Yeah.
There's no connection with the data set. When I teach at conferences about ADO.NET, I have the whole class, 1,000 people repeat after me. There's no connection associated with the data set.
And when you say it's disconnected, that could even imply that it was connected at one point. It was born in life disconnected, and it will always be disconnected. It has no properties, connection, or command, or anything.
That's right. It's free. It escapes.
And what I always tell people, that's why there's no SQL client.SQL data set.
Right.
That's why there's no OLADB client or Oracle client.data set. That's why it's, the data.data set.
Yeah.
So that's where we kind of use the patterns. And one other thing to talk about design patterns is I speak at this conference in the Netherlands. It's a hoot. There's a bunch of folks there. There's a Fox Pro track. There's a Visual Objects track. There's a .NET track. There's a this track. And it's like 100 different technologies. And it's funny because I'll go sit into a Delphi, or they call it Delphi over there. I'll sit in on a Delphi track just to kind of see what's going on, and I'll sit in on a Fox Pro track just for kind of nostalgia, I guess. I don't know. And they're talking about design patterns in those sessions too. And they're using the same design patterns I'm using in .NET. So design patterns are definitely good to know.
In design patterns, if you're one of those programmers who just sits down, has a blank slate, and generates code, you're probably using them anyway.
You just don't know you are.
You just don't know you are. Right, so it's a good idea to see what everybody else is doing.
I can definitely say that if there's folks out there that are saying, I got to research this design pattern stuff, it can be a little intimidating when you first start. So make sure you've mastered the object-oriented and the benefits of using object-oriented code before you actually tackle the design patterns.
Right, there are a couple of brothers that wrote a design pattern book for .NET. Is it Sunblad and Sunblad, Carl?
Yeah, Per and Sten Sunblad. We're definitely going to get them on.
We got to get them on. I haven't read their book yet, but I've heard it's awesome.
I read their DNA book, which had more to do with common sense than it did with DNA, but it was just a brilliant book, and I have a lot of respect for those guys.
Right, in the Gang of Four book that Stephen mentioned earlier, Eric Gamma is the only author that I can ever remember from that book, but that's not the kind of book that you would really sit down and read and just immediately start coding. To me it's more of a thought-provoking book where you'll read it and you'll start thinking, oh yeah, that's the way something works in COM. That follows this particular design pattern.
Yeah.
Exactly. The light bulb goes off over your head, and you're like, oh, that's how they do it.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think you're actually hit on a good point. When I read that book a couple of years ago, I was like an ADO monkey at the time. I was really making my living writing COM objects and, VB and doing a lot of work with ADO. It's probably about like, in the late 90s. And I remember reading one of the patterns. I forget if it might have been the Singleton pattern. I remember thinking, this is how they did that, meaning how the Microsoft developers did something in ADO, themselves, but under the cover. So it really was thought-provoking. You're absolutely correct in your discussion there.
In your either one of your applications or projects that you worked on, did you ever come across the need to use the interop layer?
If you remember back to the application I was speaking about at Zagat, the Windows form, the early adopter .NET app that we built, we had some core, I would say, business logic that was sitting around in COM, in VB6, which is where we called it our legacy application, which was pieced together over the years, and we really didn't have the time. I mean, this is, now you remember what happened, the layoffs of the, .com bust and everything. We didn't have the time to really write that over in .NET, and I couldn't go in front of management and say, I need another X developer month to do this, this, and this. So I said, hey, let's try out the COM interop. And we used COM interop, and we were just so surprised how well it worked, to the point where we were testing our .NET apps were exposed to our VB6 project, which was amazing. So we did some research with COM interop, and we went with it. And the performance was just fine. We when we put it in front of users, there was no performance degradation whatsoever. In a lab when we pounded on this thing with WinRunner or something, obviously there was a slight tiny lag, but we're talking about milliseconds.
Yeah,
here.
From what I understand, there's about an overhead of 35 instructions, processor instructions per call, plus marshalling overhead, and that's really not much in the grand scheme of things. That brings me to a good point, Stephen, which I'm constantly getting people asking me about performance as if the year was 1984, or 1989.
Okay.
I don't think people have realized that the sheer magnitude of improvement of processor speed that we've had just in the last 5 years, just quantum leaps ahead. When VB4 came out, it wasn't quite up to snuff, the processor speed. Processor speed wasn't quite there to handle
Especially
VB4.
With 32-bit, yeah.
Right, the 32-bit jump, and it really took a little bit of to get over that hump. And people were then concerned about squeezing every ounce of performance out of a thing. How much overhead does it and I remember Scott Swanson at Microsoft having the most popular VBit sessions. It was an optimizing VB. And it was like, get a variable and pull the property value into the variable, and then use the variable if you're going to use it. Use width, for example. Because we can shave a few milliseconds off and a few milliseconds here. And, so people naturally bring that same sort of skepticism forward and that same yardstick with .NET. But now it's like, we didn't want to use interop because of the performance degradation. I'm like, you know what? Or C# but in VB. That's a great one, because VB has to make a call into the VB library, whereas C# doesn't. It's not going to make your form load any faster when you push the button, people.
Exactly.
We're talking about a millisecond or two, tops here.
And millisecond, the human brain just can't process
what
we're talking about here.
When you were talking about performance differences between, this and that, and, generally it's just shut up.
Carl, always the diplomat.
No, okay,
Carl,
I can see performance differences.
Carl, is sensitive to others' feelings.
Right. I can see performance differences between web services and remoting. Those are significant. You're talking like seconds. We're talking about seconds here. But, using interop or,
what I get on a rant is when developers, I've made my living over the last 5 years or so managing large development teams, and I'll get a developer coming up to me, and they'll have all this code that I barely understand because they've done exactly what you said. They've moved the properties into a variable and this and that because they can save a millisecond.
Right. And they've spent more time.
And I just keep saying, stop the madness.
It's true.
We
don't need to do that anymore.
And the funny thing about it is, so the DBA doesn't put an index on a particular column and a stored procedure is slow. So developer thinks they have to spend a day changing, variables from int 32 to int 64 or whatever to squeeze an extra nanomillisecond when all we had to do was put a friggin' index on a field and we have boom, sub-second response time.
Right, it's true.
That reminds me, I got to tell you this. I had a student recently that was telling me how slow one of their .NET apps was performing. And, we were talking about different decisions they'd made in the coding of it, and it all sounded good. So I asked them, can you bring it in and let me take a look at it? And when they brought it in and, we ran it, I noticed that the debug file was still out there. And the student had put into production a debug release rather than the release version of the code. And I had not really thought about how bad that would affect performance, but
especially in a web app.
Right, it's a web app. It was dramatic.
Yep.
Yeah, because the web app has the whole remote debugging aspect to it. So that with that file that you would attach to.
Yeah, and that can cause big problems, like hang problems, not just.
Yeah. I know. I told him. I said, "Have you noticed that little drop down where it's got release and debug up there?" And he's like, "No, I hadn't noticed that."
Yeah, I've made that mistake before beta 2. So I mean, I think Microsoft should do the world a service, and I think that's a very common problem. And I think when you hit the little copy project button in Visual Studio, and you're tagged as debug, it should kind of flag like a little message box that says, "Are you sure you really want to do this?"
Yeah, a klaxon should go off.
Right, and then if you say yes, another box should pop up and say, "Are you really, really, really sure?" Because web apps are our public thing. Web apps are our face to the world. Right, so
yeah.
a failing .NET app out there on the internet is bad PR for the platform because it's such a great platform.
It's just asking for trouble to put that out there.
Exactly.
So you've done a bit of work with the ASP.NET Data Grid, have you not?
Yeah, we I've actually became a real big fan of the Data Grid when when Beta 2 rolled out of .NET, and we were really working it together on the Windows forums. But, speaking at a lot of the conferences, they said, hey, can you start researching some of the things? And I started looking at the data grid, and I really immediately looked at the sorting features and the paging aspect of it, and the programmatic access to getting, when the data gets bound, you can dynamically do different things, and the in-place editing, of the data grid. And, at the end of the day, we're just sending the client HTML. And that's what's amazing about this thing is 2 lines of code, okay? Datagrid.dataSource equals, the name of your data reader, your data set, datagrid.databind. 2 lines of code can get you a very complex, well-formatted HTML table on the client, which would have taken significant amount of code in ASP Classic.
Hey, speaking of data grids, Stephen, have you heard of the Data Grid Girl?
Yes, I have, actually. I've heard of the Data Grid Girl. I went to her website, datagrid.com. I was researching something on the repeater control and did a Google search, and that's actually how I found her because, I was basically, as all of you probably know, if you go to www.google.com/Microsoft.htm and just type in a line of code, you'll get an answer faster than anywhere else in the world, including MSDN.com. And
cool. So that brought you to her site?
I think I did item data. I don't know. I was doing something, and because the data grid had an exact same property, I actually stumbled across her website. I said, this will be interesting.
Well, it just so happens she's on the line with us.
Wow, that's exciting. I always wanted to meet the Data Grid Girl.
Hey, Data Grid Girl.
Hi there.
So what's your real name?
Marcy Robillard.
Hi, Marcy. Now, for those of you who don't know, www.datagridgirl.com is your site, right?
That's right.
And this is really a cool site. I was pretty blown away. It's a very girly girl site.
Yeah.
And it's very
pink.
Yeah, it's done in pink in a very cool font. That sort of reminded me of Polly Pockets or something like that. But it's all about the data grid.
That's right.
And it's got some really good stuff on there.
When I heard the name Data Grid Girl, I thought superhero. Here are people that are in despair and you come to their rescue.
Actually, someone emailed me the other day and asked me if I write my data grid code wearing a cape.
And do you?
No. But I said yes because it sounded funny. A pink cape and a mask.
Where did you come up with this idea?
Well, I don't know. It kind of came to me last year. I was at a conference and talking with some other people, and I really wanted an area to specialize in. And so I was just trying to come up with something in .NET. I only played around with the betas, and I ended up deciding on the data grid, and I thought it'd be a good idea to focus on it. It's one of the few things that I'd worked with and really thought was really neat about ASP.NET, and decided to develop a website devoted to it.
Cool.
Well,
And
it's my favorite server control.
It is. I mean, it's the most powerful server control. It has the most features and a lot of stuff built in.
And you have developed a bit of a database of code and tips and
Yep.
resources.
And articles.
Yeah. Give us a few examples of some of the stuff we'll see on your site.
The part that I like the most right now is my frequently asked questions section. I spend a lot of time answering questions on the ASP.NET forums and the news groups and a couple of different listservs.
Yeah, you're actually an MVP for ASP with Microsoft, aren't you?
That's right. I am a Microsoft MVP.
And those are the most valuable players or of
I think
the
they call
of
it
the
most valuable
forums?
professionals.
Most valuable professionals. The people who answer a lot of questions
People
on
who
the
answer a lot of
news
questions.
groups.
Your life will change by being an MVP. Random things will come in the mail to your house.
That is true.
I got a watch once. I got a notepad once, a pen. Lots of great toys.
Yeah, I got the watch this year.
The watch
heard
is cool.
other things about Swiss Army knives. And
Oh, the Swiss Army knife was cool too.
But my watch wasn't pink, so I was kind of disappointed.
I have to tell you, a quick story is pink. That would be, see, if they would have went to your website, they would have done their homework.
They've been to my website. I know my MVP lead was a definite fan of the site.
Well, I live in New York City, and I got the watch, and they shipped it from Redmond, and they went in and switched the time to New York City time before they shipped me the watch. And I thought that was
No,
special.
I think
That's
mine
class.
was on my local time zone
See?
too, and I just thought it was a coincidence.
Hey, I'm online at msdn.microsoft.com/msdnmag, and I'm looking at a preview of the May issue where Dino Esposito has an article on real-world XML, where the approach he's using is using XML readers and writers in the framework, which are sort of a unique somewhere between the power of the XML DOM and the simplicity of SAX. You have these readers and writers which can accomplish some amazing things with little code. And he goes into node readers and dealing with text and strings and fragments, validating readers, all sorts of great stuff. Go check it out. And it's my favorite development magazine, MSDN magazine. If you don't have a subscription, you're crazy. Well, anyway, let's get back to our conversation with the Data Grid girl and Stephen Forte right here on .NET Rocks. Hey, listen, I want to thank you very much for all your support, and tell a friend about our show, won't you? I'd sure appreciate it. All right, let's get back to the fun. Stick around.
So how long have you been working with .NET, and what kinds of projects have you done? And tell us about your programming experience.
Well, I've been working with .NET for about almost 2 years, off and on. Early stuff just playing with the betas, and then now I finally get to do it professionally.
Mm-hmm.
I've been programming for 6.5 years total professionally, and
Cool.
most of that was classic ASP and VB, and then .NET in the last couple of years.
Oh, great. So what are some of the cool things you've done with the data grid?
Oh gosh, I do lots of things with the data grid. A lot of times when I'm answering questions on the list or on the news groups, I just build little snippets, so I have just a huge collection of samples. Lately I've been doing a lot with view state. There's a lot of things you can do still with the data grid when view state's disabled, which is really helpful for speeding up your page.
Right.
So I've been playing around a lot with that and trying to get things, making sure, you have to do some special tricks to get all the events to work in a data grid without view state. So I've
Yeah.
been working a lot with that lately.
Yeah, that's true. I think a lot of people need to get used to the fact that the data events happen in the data table, not the data grid. And getting used to
there's still a lot
that.
of confusion. People don't understand the difference between a data set and a data table and a data reader and a data
Right.
grid.
Because they all start with data for crying
Yeah,
out
why'd
loud.
they do
It's
that?
confusing.
Microsoft thought they were helping us.
Take a data this and put it into a data that, and you get a data the other thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Very cool. So I guess we heard about you from Chris and Ari's Cheap Ass Show,
Oh yeah, VBTV?
VBTV.
Yeah.
That's
Yep.
right.
And so it's been going pretty well for you. What's your hit count like?
I think I get about 10,000 hits a week now.
Wow.
I've just put the site up last April, and I think I had about 100 hits that month, and it's really grown over time. And just in the last 2 or 3 months is when the hits have really started taking off.
Very cool.
It shows the popularity of the data grid besides, the popularity of your site.
It really is an amazingly popular control. Like if you look at the ASP.NET forums, for example, just the number of questions on data grids is a huge percentage of the questions on the site.
So I got a question for you.
Yeah.
What's up with e.item.cells parentheses 7 controls.0 all C type to a text box text to get the value?
Yeah, what were they thinking?
I mean, come on.
Well, if you're using template columns and you name your controls, you can skip some of that with just using find control.
Find control,
but
right?
If you're using bound columns, then that's what you got to do.
Yeah,
it's not pretty, but
in fact, most of the people that I know who do ASP.NET say they use nothing but template columns.
Yeah, I use them a lot.
There's no other way to travel.
Yeah. So Marcy, are you doing a lot of consulting work, or are you doing any training? What kind of stuff do you do as Data Grid Girl?
I'm doing some consulting. I have a Rent Data Grid Girl page on my site, and that gets me a little bit of traffic for consulting work that I do on the side, and I'm always looking for more.
Right.
So where can people contact you?
Through my website, datagridgirl.com. My email address is listed on there, but I'll give it to you as well. It's marcy@datagridgirl.com, spelled MARCIE.
Cool. So what's next for your site?
Oh gosh, lots of things. I'm going to add, well, the latest thing I've just added is a book section. I'm reviewing the data grid chapters and all the different .NET books that I have.
Oh, cool.
And I just put that up recently. And the next thing I'm going to do is a how-to section.
Great.
Kind of like my frequently asked questions, but a little bit longer. The facts are more like a paragraph answer. These would be like a page and answer, things that take a little bit longer to address.
What's your number one hottest tip for somebody using the data grid?
Hottest tip? Let me think about that. Probably the most common mistake that people do, and this is true not just for data grid work also, but just forgetting to check for postback and page load.
Yeah.
And that can cause it's not real obvious the problems that it causes.
It's true.
You can spend hours trying to debug, and it's just that one line that you need. And that's one of the facts I have on my fact page.
Right.
Yeah, that's when I tell people that in class. I said, look, you're going to forget this.
Yeah. It's the easiest thing to forget. I know I did it myself several times when I was starting out.
Right.
Now, it finally becomes a force of habit, but it takes some time.
The problem that I still have is I make a nice generic function that fills my data grid. I call it usually the fill grid method. And then I forget to call it on page load or postback. And then I'm like cursing Microsoft. How come my grid isn't working? That's my number one tip.
Yeah, I see that question a lot.
Right. Eat your Wheaties in the morning.
Exactly.
What?
Eat your Wheaties in the morning.
Yeah.
Well, are we going to see you at Tech Ed?
I hope so.
Great.
I haven't signed up yet, but I'm hoping to go.
Right. Tech Ed's going to be in Dallas this year, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's going to be a great show.
Yeah, that's we didn't actually say where you're from. You're in Texas.
I'm in Fort Worth, Texas.
It's here a close drive.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Tech Ed's just across town.
Cool. Well, we're as a matter of fact, Stephen is in charge of the regional director party and getting together a band.
Oh, really?
We're musicians in our other lives.
And I drafted Carl to lead the jam session.
So we're going to have sort of a jam session. I don't know, can non-RDs get into this party?
We can arrange Data Grid Girl to get it in.
Absolutely. We'll give you a free pass.
Does that count for anything?
What's that?
MVP counts for something.
Oh, sure.
Cool.
Definitely does.
Well, that'd be fun.
Sure. So we'll keep an eye out for you. Well, thanks. Thanks for calling. And keep rocking. It's a great site.
All right. Take care. Have a great night.
You too.
So, Stephen, before we say goodbye here, you have any favorite tools, absolute must-have tools in your tool chest for developers, .NET developers in particular?
I have a couple tools. Some fall in the category of development, controls, and some of them are just straight tools. The first is its most basic form is a tool called Ultra Edit 32.
Ooh. And
Ultra Edit 32 sounds very boring when you first hear about it. It is a text editor, and it is a more advanced Notepad or WordPad, and it's fully Unicode and everything else. And it's also a hex editor. But what's great about Ultra Edit 32, besides having a most recently used menu, which Notepad lacks, it gives you the ability to do super fast find and replace on huge log files, and you don't have to even open the files. You can point your find and replace to a directory and say, do for every .txt file in this directory, including or excluding subdirectories. So I've used it to do some find and replace in, 3 gigabyte log files, sitting on a server somewhere.
TextPad does that too.
It's much faster than TextPad.
So you've used them both?
Yeah, I've definitely used both. And what I find really great about UltraEdit is it's actually a little mini IDE. You can load some little dictionaries and some little files into UltraEdit, and when you right click and open up a .cs page or open up an XML page, it'll even give you some IntelliSense on what you're doing.
Oh wow, it does IntelliSense. That's cool.
And it has a dictionary,
That's
but
incredible.
I've yet to figure out how to get the spell check to work. But I mean, not basically because I haven't needed it. Because some people are text fanatics. I mean, I've drank the Kool-Aid, and I use Microsoft Word for pretty much all of that type of stuff for my writing and stuff. But you can actually load in dictionaries, and it's also localized, so you can load in different dictionaries dynamically. So UltraEdit is my all-time favorite tool. I talk about it all the time.
Well, I wish I had taken a look at that. I've often said that TextPad was my ASP development tool.
Well, I'm going to have to check it out because I am a TextPad zealot. So
because UltraEdit gives you color coding when you
the
open
newer
up source
versions
code.
of TextPad do too.
Yeah, TextPad does that too.
Yeah, I haven't played with TextPad in a good year or two.
Yeah, from what you've mentioned, probably speed with the multi-file replace on a large file is the only thing I think you've mentioned so far. TextPad doesn't do IntelliSense with
it doesn't.
A .NET language.
Yeah, you can definitely get IntelliSense, and I'm a big fan also of XML Spy, but to kind of bring, which I won't really talk about because most people know about it. But
there's a lot that don't. That's true. I think you should give a little description.
I think XML Spy is an XML IDE, and the two coolest things that I find about XML Spy are, you could be working with a XSLT. Now, there's other tools that do this now, but at the time when it first came out, you could be working with an XSLT file, and you have multiple ones in a raw XML document. Then you can dynamically say, apply this XSLT, and it gives you a preview window. And just to kind of see the results of your effort right there immediately, instead of having to kind of go in and make an HTML page that merged them all together or something, or do a transform node, was fabulous. The other is the ability to import things in a really, a lot of things will do this, import and export as XML, but it does a fabulous job of it. It can read MDB files, it can read ODBC files, Word documents, and it really does intelligent element mapping. But one thing about XML Spy is XML Spy, like anything else, will fall over when you try to open, let's say, something ridiculous like a 200 megabyte XML file.
Right.
Open up an UltraEdit 32, it takes like 2 seconds.
Yeah.
I'm gonna continue plugging UltraEdit 32.
Cool. And you mentioned you used the Dundas charting controls. How did that work out?
At Corzin, we looked at the ChartFX. We looked at all the third-party chart controls and things that we could have done kind of homegrown with some Microsoft stuff and the Office web components. And we settled on the Dundas chart control. And we really, company's name is Dundas, and we really had great success with it. And they're also a good company that backs their product. We've went back for some support and looking at different issues, and the chart itself is a pleasure to use. With all chart controls, there's tons of chart types and properties and methods that are hard to figure out. And Dundas, I guess it's just between the good documentation and intuitive properties that you can actually really easily use the advanced charts. Because a lot of times a chart company will sell you on these great financial bubble charts, but you can never code them. You just want to do some data binding, and part of that is just IntelliSense works. Sometimes you buy these third-party controls and the IntelliSense doesn't work right, so
and there's no sample.
That works out real good.
Yep. So you evaluated ChartFX?
Yeah, I like ChartFX a lot. Don't get me wrong. One of the reasons we chose Dundas is they were ready for .NET before ChartFX, and then one of the other reasons was, as I said, the real ease of use of getting some of their advanced features just done. Just labeling and custom labeling and that type of stuff, which is...
Do they make a Windows Forms version as well?
They make them all pretty much, yeah. There's a Windows version, there's a ASP Classic version.
Cool. Well, we'll put a link.
Cool. We got to give it a look.
Yeah, we'll put a link to that site up.
There's two nice features about it. It could do what I find nice is it can do a round robin GIF creation on the server, or it can do binary streaming down to the client, which is really neat.
Very cool.
It is pretty neat. And there's actually another something I use called Star Team. It used to be made by a company called Starbase, but now it's made by they were purchased by Borland. And the Star Team is a combination issue tracking system and source control. And you have teams over 4 or 5 people, and then you also have the business folks too. It's a great tool.
Wow.
It can get a little pricey, but what we really like about it is developers will be assigned. There's automatic routing if you want, or you can do it manually. But developers' issues will get entered by the QA folks, and
it's a polite word for bugs, right?
Exactly. It'll get assigned to a developer, and it's all coded and integrated. Developer will then check out the code from Star Team, work on it in Visual Studio, check it back in, and then something called a build label will pop up. And they will apply a label to this particular build of their code. And one of the things that you can require them is say, which Star Team issues, numbers, did you select from the box, which ones did you close out? So the next morning when the build manager does a build, you have a really automated build report. And then, of course, there's bug reports and all that type of stuff. But the build report is indispensable with large projects because one of the things that you'll be doing is you'll be looking at the build report and said, wait a second, we closed that bug, and this developer on their build label said they did, and it's, so the build is broken, or et cetera, et cetera. So it's indispensable tool for larger projects.
Did you see the rants that are going on in the RD list right now about source safe and version control software and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think one of the RDs put it as Microsoft is doing the world a disservice by making source safe free.
Yeah.
Because SourceSafe is a less than desirable product, and
they don't even use it for more than 20 people.
Oh, I wouldn't use it for more than 4 or 5 people.
Yeah.
I will be the first to say that I do not agree with Bill Vaughn. That I am a fan of Jet.
Really?
I'll give you a full disclosure. I used to work with the Jet team as a contractor. So
okay.
But Jet is a good little desktop app. It's a great little tool. DAO and Jet were the bomb at its time, and the problem is Jet is not something that's for mission critical apps, nor
not a client
something
server
for
thing either.
Large work groups. And SourceSafe still uses Jet to store. So if you have fears of Access databases corrupting, Jet databases corrupting, and you're storing all your source code in SourceSafe, you have problems. Exactly. You can have some irrecoverable
Scott
problems.
Guthrie at Dev Connections last year was on a Q&A panel, and he's one of the 2 guys that invented ASP.NET, he and Mark Anders. Well, anyway, the question was posed to him, what does Microsoft use for source control? And he says they use a combination of SourceSafe for projects where there's less than 20 people involved. They use Slime, SLM.
Interesting.
And they also use SourceGear for big projects.
Interesting.
Well, I know definitely they use SourceSafe. I was just out there working on a courseware project 2 weeks ago, and everything for the courseware project was stored in SourceSafe.
Yeah, so I think part of the problem is Microsoft does eat their own dog food, but here's a case where they're not fully eating their dog food.
And the dog food is 7 years old.
Yeah, it is. I've always said, the joke is, what have the newest version of Visual SourceSafe? What has it done? Well, it's changed the letter after its name, right? 60C.
Well, that was a product they bought, wasn't it?
I have no idea the history behind it.
Yeah, I think it was a purchase from another company.
So they probably don't know enough about the code to make it work right.
You're probably right in that regard.
Star Team, the one you mentioned, that you've had good success with over 20 developers, obviously, with that.
Yeah, I've had great success with smaller teams as well on Star Team. It's not for someone like Data Grid Girl, who has obviously a very small consulting shop. It's probably her and 1 or 2 folks. But if you're working on projects of really more than 2 people touching the code, you could probably get away with SourceSafe. But if you're working on a project where you have organized version control and organized issue tracking, where the business folks need those type of reports, don't use the world's largest issue tracking system, which is Microsoft Excel.
Right.
Something like Star Team integrates so well with Visual Studio and integrates so well on the business side, with taking the issue management tracking.
Cool.
Now, you said it gets kind of expensive.
It definitely does, and I'm not sure how that will change for the better or for the worse with Borland, but it is not cheap, and that's where by making SourceSafe free, unfortunately, Microsoft is creating this expectation that source control software should be cheap or free or relatively inexpensive. And, quite frankly, hey, I'm out there to save money, but I also will save money if my developers aren't wrestling with SourceSafe and,
right.
Going around, and it doesn't work well over VPN. So, StarTeam works just flawlessly over VPN and remote access. So,
Yeah.
It's definitely a tool to check out. It's, for the larger, obviously it's really great in a corporate environment. It's, small consulting shops, it may be cost prohibitive, but I have no idea where Borland's going to go with that.
All right. Well, listen, we're about out of time. Is there any last-minute wisdom you want to impart to the listening audience?
I guess just if you're using the data grid, try turning off view state and see what happens.
That's good advice. Definitely good advice.
And it's okay to return a data set to your client application.
Absolutely. That's what it's for. It's for traveling.
It is for traveling.
It's for traveling across the internet through layers all the way up and back.
Hopefully one day we can pass it on into the database.
Oh, that's another show.
You got it.
All right. Well, we'll talk to you later, Stephen. Thanks for calling and being a guest, and always a pleasure to talk to you.
Same here.
It's been great, Stephen. Thanks so much.
Okay, take care. Have a good night.
Good night.
Take
Good
care.
night.
Bye.